listening to Magic from Wherever I'm At with your host, the magician, time traveler, and charmer, Dartagnan.
All right, you're back with Dartagnan. This is episode 5 of Magic from Wherever I'm At. And today we're going to talk about a magic show. Who is it for? Right? Who are you really doing this for? And this goes for basically any form of entertainment. A lot of magicians seem to make choices wholly based on themselves in terms of like they do the tricks that they only enjoy. They do these really complicated things. It's often confusing. And there's a lot of like themselves, placed into it in terms of the decision making as to how it's accomplished. One of the things you learn very, very quickly on the street, keep in mind, I did a lot of indoor performing before I even went to the street. Once I went to the street, I found out really how weak everything I was doing was. You know, just like I referenced Jimmy Talks a lot saying, and I think episode 1 or 2, you know, you just felt like you were a complete fraud, I would say, because it was so obvious that what you were doing was just like so weak and watered down and lame that when you started to work for people on the street and you weren't entertaining, I mean, they just left, basically. They voted with their feet and with their wallets, and often those two things left simultaneously. So quickly you learned, boy, you know, this show is about the audience. You know, and I was always good at interacting with people. You know, if you hear me tell it, I basically stole my father's personality, who was this gregarious character. And in the town I grew up in, you know, everybody knew him. You know, he was the principal of the junior high. He had a few companies, and people adored him. You know, everywhere we went, he was met with like, oh, they just wanted to talk to him, shake his hand, spend 5 minutes. He'd joke with them, he'd tease them. And over the years of hanging out with my father as a kid, I basically saw that in action and adopted it. So when I became an adult, you know, I used that almost by osmosis. It had trickled into me. And so I just started talking to people, random people, you know, and I've continued that ever since. You know, I talk to people all day long, usually if I'm out socially. You know, I worked at a nightclub for many years, which really was the environment for that kind of thing. And the important part about this is the people. What do they like? You know, not what are the tricks you like or you like performing, or this is my favorite trick. Because I see that a lot out of people who call themselves magicians. You know, they perform these really confusing and awkward tricks that nobody can really even follow. And it just, audience doesn't care, you know? And in most venues, the audience won't just get up and leave. And so for many people out there performing, you're living, you know, especially if you're not that entertaining and you haven't figured that out yet, you're living under a veil of pleasantries because people in a restaurant, you know, and so forth, or at a cocktail party, they're not just going to leave because they're there for other reasons. People on the street aren't there to see a magic show, so they'll just freely continue about their day. They don't care about you at all. And this makes it such a beautiful opportunity to understand what really makes a magic show go. Because if you're not entertaining, the magic cannot do the heavy lifting. It just will not. You know, people say, oh, that's cool, and continue about their day. You can't hold them. You can't make them tip. They don't care because the entertainment part makes them like you. And that's why people tip. And that's why people ultimately will like your magic show no matter what venue you're in. If they like you, you can almost do anything. And if they don't like you, and often it's the performer putting up these obstacles to liking you, then almost nothing you will do will matter because they don't care, you know? And this comes back to the last episode where I talked about making a presentation a bit, you know, and that'll be a continuing theme here is like, you got to work on that presentation, you know? Street magicians, we all often joke. Another one of my mentors is a man named Warpo who lives in New Orleans. He's like a fixture. He's almost like the de facto mayor of the French Quarter. If you walk around with him, people are always trying to talk to him and so forth. And him and I joked, and often joke a great deal, that, this magic stuff, like people just don't care about the tricks. They just don't care about magic. I had a friend, another magician named Joel. He works primarily restaurants and kids shows. And he thinks, his opinion was that a lot of people really like magic. And I don't think that's the case, actually. If you're out on the street and it's obvious what you're doing is magic, people aren't confused maybe at first that what you're doing is magic, because maybe you don't have a sign that says magic show or something, which is at the beginning is a good idea, then you'll see just how many people don't care for magic, because the ratio of people just walking by to people that end up in your show is so vast that they really don't care about magic, but they find you intriguing as a character, as a person, and they get to know you or get to know that character, chances are, which is an extension of yourself usually, then they don't care what you do, as long as you're entertaining, they'll just be like, man, this guy's awesome. So that's, one of the things that's so important is like you're always trying to facilitate more enjoyment for the audience. And especially on the street, because they're the ones who are going to ultimately determine whether you can continue to do this. And so the more, you get them involved, the more they enjoy themselves, the more, and this is one of the things I think that just flies by a lot of people calling themselves magicians. It's like they think, oh, they're doing magic like at people. Instead, I've seen this a lot on the street too. People really struggling because they do great magic. They're fantastic in some cases with their magic, but they're doing it at people. They're not doing it with or for people. And as a result, it does nothing for the audience. The audience is like, obviously you're really good, and that's cool for you, but what does that do for us? And I have a friend in Chicago who named Jeremy Pitt Payne. He no longer lives there at the moment, but I first met him when he lived in Chicago. We really lived in Wisconsin, but he worked in Chicago. And him and I would talk about this all the time. Jeremy was probably the hardest working street performer I've ever heard of, let alone met or seen. He has a very large family, and man, he would just grind out shows like 10, 12 hours a day, unrelenting. Funny guy, smart guy, awesome guy, real character. And we would often watch other people. We'd talk about other people we'd seen come through Chicago or through New Orleans, and like how they just did magic at people, and how even though they were really good at magic, And this is a funny story I'm gonna relate, because when I was in Chicago several years ago, there was a police officer that Jeremy introduced me to, who was down. He was like the leader of that section of Michigan Avenue that we were on. I wish I could remember his name, but Jeremy knew him very well, and he came over and he introduced me. We talked, and he'd seen my show because he'd linger in the background. He'd sit in his car, his truck, as part of his duty, and he'd watch people out there. There were cops were very aggressive against bucket drummers and stuff down there, so they were like always watching street performers. And he had seen my show, unbeknownst to me, he'd seen my street show a number of times. And so we were talking, and then we talked about another performer who'd come through town. And even the cop, the police officer, had said, he's seems like he's really actually good at the magic part of it, but he's just doing magic at people, and nobody cares, And that was such a, from a layperson, if you will, such a strong comment, because even he recognized what was going on there, and a lot of that has to do with ego-driven stuff, where people are just like, look how great I am, and the audience is like, okay, so you're great. What does that do for us? Because it doesn't do anything for us. We just think that you're great. So, and oftentimes that's not enough, anywhere near enough to have anything good happen out there. And it really blinds you, because if you don't accept that feedback, you can't see that feedback. at obvious feedback. And this, from what I heard, this performer was getting some pretty obvious feedback. Then, you know, you're going to be lost. You know, you're going to be completely in the shadow. And I see a lot of that. I mean, just like people just pushing magic on people instead of actually becoming one with the audience. You know, the beauty of doing a magic show, and this is the way I conduct my show, is like, if it seems like you did nothing and they did everything, at the end, they may not be totally with it, the audience. You know, they may not even be that with it, but they're not oblivious. And at the end of the show, you'll get, if you conduct it that way, they will understand that you are a master, because then it seems like you didn't do anything and they did everything, and they're much more enjoying because there's so much more interaction, and they're so much happier because they've been involved. But then at the end, they're kind of like, but you orchestrated this whole thing somehow. You must be a real wizard, because it barely seemed like you did anything, and yet all this cool stuff happened. So you get that credit even more so. And this is what a lot of people miss. They want some sort of credit for being fantastic at sleight of hand or something. They got some chip on their shoulder, and the audience, especially on the street, is like not going to give you that. They don't care at all about that. And so once you connect with them and you involve them deeper and deeper, and it seems like you're not even doing anything, if you can create that illusion even further, they will adore you, and they will think you are a absolute sorcerer. So the rant for today is going to be talking about other people who approached me, sort of hoping I would see them as magicians and see them as kinfolk, if you will, but who made it really impossible for me to see them that way and see them in that light. And one story I'll start off by relating is, I was in New Orleans many years ago. I was in the middle of a show, and once you're doing shows for a while, you can sense when you don't have to look, you know, and my days from being doing security at nightclubs probably really enhanced this sort of sixth sense as well. Is I could just know when people walk up to me from the sides, even without looking. You know, you develop this extrasensory almost perception of like where people are spatially in reference to you. And so I felt some extra people on my right-hand side come into the crowd. And while I was going through the patter of the trick, you know, the story associated with this trick, under, sort of not so under his breath, but like, so I could hear it, this person did this really lame thing of sort of like coughing while simultaneously suggesting a method I was using. Okay? And I heard it, of course, and I thought to myself, wow, this person is like, wow, just wow. You know, you're at a loss on so many levels for why this person doesn't get it that it's even hard to explain. But for somebody to do that in the middle of a show, you know, and think in any way, shape, or form that they're a magician is like a complete, it's so laughable, you know. So what happened was, this guy does this, and I hear this, and I don't even look at him because I'm continuing the show, and I'm thinking, oh my God, another one of these. Because this has happened so many times, not people trying to like, you know, say methods under their breath, but this has happened where people who think they're magicians come up to me on the street and attempt, I think, to connect. But they do it in such a implausibly lame, you know, way that it's just like kills the whole thing. And so if you're out there, this is like a public service announcement of sort of people who may think they're magicians. First of all, listen to episode 1, because that will determine whether you actually are. And then number 2 is listen to this episode and what I'm about to say, because this has happened to all my friends that are street magicians and people in other venues, you know, but it seems to happen more on the street because of the sort of wild, wild west nature of the venue itself. So this person comes up after the show. Like, I didn't even look at the guy, so I didn't even know what he looked like. He gave me $1, okay, which I do remember, and he wrapped it around his business card, and his business card claimed he was a magician. Now, him and I both know he wasn't, you know, and I quickly ascertained that by asking where he worked, which was nowhere. And he claimed to be from a certain area where I knew all the workers, and he didn't know any of those people. So we quickly sussed things out as to who was doing what. Now you don't have to be a professional magician to be considered a magician. If you go back to episode 1 and listen to my definition, getting paid for it or something is not one of the conditions. Okay? But it's obvious to me when people are this awkward in their lack of social intelligence that they do things. Now this, and like I said, this happens all the time. I mean, I'm not talking about every day, but I'm talking about probably every month or every 2 months, So this person puts it in, and I pull it out, and I look at him, and he's got like some Chris Angel type stuff on. He wants to be seen as like this kind of a gothic person with some jewelry, and so that's fine. Maybe you're trying to build a character or something. And I said, and he says, but he gave me his business card, and he really never told me why he wanted to connect. But I said, is this you? Or, yeah, I don't need your business card. I mean, if you want to be my friend, you don't need to have me a business card. You can just be a normal person and like shake my hand and like introduce yourself, and we can be friends, And then the next thing he did, which is right when I asked him where did he work, because I've seen this so many times, it was like one triggered the other, is he reached into his pocket. And that is like the universal symbol of like, I'm going to pull out something, and usually a deck of cards, and I'm going to show you a trick, And this is a cardinal sin. I mean, are you listening out there? If you're listening out there, drink this part in of the elixir first. Do not show another magician a trick when he's working. If you want to go to a convention, you want a session, you want to get together, you want to do a bunch of those like normal things where people get together, talk about tricks and stuff. But here's 2 points I will make clear. Do not show me tricks out when I'm working. I've seen basically every trick there is. I don't know them all, but I've seen variations of almost anything. I'm like especially well read. And like most magicians who work are. So we don't need to see any more tricks. And if you want to get together with us, we can do it on another day when I'm not working, And I'm sure this guy was probably even nice, but he put up that barrier so quickly of like, I'm like you, I'm going to show you, maybe I'll be impressed by people are not impressed by tricks, incidentally, especially other magicians in most contexts, especially people who are working, because you do this for a living. You see it in a different manner, than the hobbyist, So this guy was obviously a hobbyist, which is fine. But this is a cardinal sin of seeing another magician. If you go to a magic show, you go to any magic show, it's on the street, in a theater, you see a magician at a restaurant, at a kid's party. If you want to get together with him, you make friends and you treat him like a normal person. And then maybe you can get together some other time when he finds out you're interested in magic just like he is. But to try to show somebody a trick while they're working, or to interrupt their ability to work to show them a trick, is like the worst social etiquette on the planet. So just, I'm putting this out here now. This is one of the reasons I want the podcast. I want this stuff to filter into the magic community so these people can stop doing this. We all love magic, and it's a great art, and there's many ways to be involved with it. But if you see a professional working, don't show them tricks. Like I said, if you go back to episode 4, you'll see why. Most professional workers are really not talking about the tricks. They're talking about all the other aspects above that foundation, more so, and especially street performers, because they're more attuned to that than anybody. So that's the rant for today. Don't be a social alien and start, call yourself a magician if you don't perform regularly for people who don't know you. And don't foist tricks on other magicians when you happen upon them because you are interested in magic and you think you're the same. In many ways, you might be the same. Just act like a normal person. Introduce yourself in a normal fashion. You may wish to, suggest that you also love magic, because here's the end of that story. There was a guy, after that guy gave me his business card and I asked him where he worked, and I found out he was just a hobbyist. The friend that he was with, even when I said that, his friend laughed, thereby outing him as well. When they left, there was another young guy standing back against the garbage cans on the corner. This was on the corner of St. Peter and Decatur. And he came up after those guys left, and he kind of looked at those guys like, what was that about? And, he tipped me. He'd seen half the show while he went into this bar, this Oyster House bar next to me, and he'd seen the last half when he'd come out. And he tipped me very well, and he was a bartender from New York. Now, he approached it in exactly the right way. He was like, oh, I love the show, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm a bartender from New York. He was there for a taste of the cocktail or whatever the thing is they have every year in New Orleans. And he said, you know what, I used to be involved with the SAM, when I was younger, and I really love magic. And we talked quite a bit, So within a minute of this other Yahoo trying to do whatever he was trying to do, which was probably connect, this guy was like doing it exactly the right way. It was like polar opposites. It was amazing, and Tony, if you're out there, the bartender from New York, I haven't really made it to New York to stay for any length of time, but I will. And you're the one I'm talking about because, this will go out eventually and maybe he'll hear this. And Tony is a great guy. Perhaps I don't remember the bar right now, but I'll mention it perhaps in a future podcast. And that's it. That's the rant. We got a little long for today. I like to keep these under 20 minutes usually, but this is an important part of conducting yourself within magic, I'd say. So enjoy. We'll be back for episode 6.